As the 2000s progressed, the fighting game genre would see a renaissance. Having made it out of the doldrums of the early decade, new advances in console technology pushed the limits of what was possible. Developers were able to make games with more content and more elaborate graphics and gameplay while still keeping the essence of what made the genre popular to begin with. When online gameplay became more accessible and widespread, it would forever change the way that players would experience these games. Not only were fighting games making their way back into the mainstream, but they would cultivate an all-new generation of fans. New fighting games would spring up, earning their place in fighting game history, while older franchises would continue to reinvent themselves, appealing to audiences both old and new. Throughout it all, however, there would still be one king of fighters. When King of Fighters 11 ended, things had turned up to a fever pitch. Ash Crimson had obtained both the Kagura clan's Yata Mirror and the Yagami Flame, leaving Kyo Kusanagi, the third of the Sacred Treasures, next on the hit list. The mysterious organization known as Those from the Past were attempting to break the seal on Orochi, and the three Sacred Treasures, Chizuru Kagura, Iori Yagami, and Kyo Kusanagi, were the latest descendants of the three clans that sealed the demon god away. Naturally, these three stood in the way. Things were coming to a head for King of Fighters, and soon we will find out just what Those from the Past, along with Ash Crimson, were planning. Behind the scenes, however, there was another shakeup when it came to the tech that powered the game. So before we talk about King of Fighters 13 and the end of the Tales of Ash Saga, let's talk about the change in technology. After King of Fighters 11, SNK will leave behind the Adams Wave board for another arcade platform, the Taito Type X2 hardware. 12 wouldn't be the first game which utilized the board, as King of Fighters Maximum Impact Regulation A, an arcade iteration of the Maximum Impact sub-series, was released in 2008 for Japanese arcades. And I know I keep saying this, but I swear that I'm going to give the Maximum Impact series its own video one day. The upgrade between these two platforms was even more apparent than the upgrade between the Neo Geo and the Adams Wave board. The Taito Type X family of arcade hardware, created by game developer and publisher Taito, utilized a personal computer-style setup with each iteration of the hardware utilizing a form of embedded windows. Rather than being based on a singular hardware architecture, the system featured a modular platform that allowed developers to choose a configuration scheme that best fits the requirements of their game. Thus, developers had better flexibility when making their games. Think of this in comparison to, say, the Data East Deco, the Neo Geo, or even the Adams Wave arcade board. Although these three systems utilize interchangeable components for their games, you were still hard-locked into whatever the hardware was capable of performance-wise. While the Taito Type X still had limits depending on the version, it was possible for developers to make games with different scalability requirements. In layman's terms, this meant that games could use as much or as little resources as needed. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the board, as much of this is another story for another time, and this is about SNK and King of Fighters. Also, I don't want to bore you with too much tech mumbo jumbo, but suffice it to say that the board gained a lot of popularity throughout the 2000s and 2010s, and it's still in use today, with the current version being Type X4. I can show you 5 different games that utilize some form of the hardware, and unless you are into software engineering, you wouldn't believe that they all use the same framework. I might go into a deep dive about the board later on in another video. But for now, as loath as I am to talk about it, I'm going to have to talk about King of Fighters 12 again. After King of Fighters 11, SNK wanted an all-out graphical overhaul, as confirmed by longtime KOF illustrator Nona. Whereas King of Fighters XI's art style was similar to that of the Neo Geo, with several characters even reusing Neo Geo sprites, King of Fighters XII would see SNK's artists redraw the characters from scratch. There was some confusion among the fan base when SNK Overseas manager Yoshihito Koyama stated that the game was going to be 3-dimensional mixed with 2-dimensional. This led to some concern that the game was going to be cel-shaded or even 3D. While fans probably wouldn't have minded a cel-shaded game, 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional fighting games tended to get a bad rap. Thankfully, it appears he was actually referring to the character design process, which utilized a mixture of 3D modeling and 2-dimensional art. There's also misconception throughout the fan base that SNK simply made 3D models and traced over them. However, there's much more to it than that. You see, first Nona would create the character graphics in dot pixel form, then the artists at SNK would create 3D models that are based on these designs. After giving the 3D models the moves and animations that they're going to have in the game, the 3D models are then converted back to 2D, then sent back to Nona to apply the finishing touches. So while 3D modeling does play a part in the animation, at the end of the day it's still hand-drawn art with no cel shading, as confirmed by SNK producer Masaki Kukino. And I know I mispronounced that name. Speaking of 3D, SNK stated that they had no intention of ever taking the series to the third dimension. I'm sure this statement will age well. Anyway, as much as I rag on King of Fighters 12, you can't deny that it had some beautiful looking graphics. There was a drawback though. Due to all the time it took in development, SNK's artists would spend 16 to 17 months on a character. This is why 12 had the smallest roster in the series, as it was basically a glorified tech demo. But with King of Fighters 13, SNK would have the kinks worked out, and the game would close out the Ash story arc in an epic manner. After the chaotic events of the last game, there was a lot of speculation and confusion as to what would happen next, or if there would even be a tournament. Thankfully, Rose Adelheid is on hand to announce the start of the new tournament, and all is well, or at least all seems to be. Yeah, there is something going behind the scenes, but we're just glad King of Fighters is back. In a way, the game's story can be considered a parallel to the real-world happenings of King of Fighters at the time. After King of Fighters 12 turned out to be a shit show, people were concerned about the direction the series would go next. Then suddenly, SNK Playmore announces King of Fighters 13, and all is well. And if the game's ending was anything to go by, the next entry will be something of a reboot, or at least a jumping on point for new fans. King of Fighters 13 will be released in Japanese arcades in 2010, with PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 releases in late 2011 worldwide. The 360 version was backwardly compatible on the Xbox One and Series X. These home versions would introduce DLC characters for the very first time, along with an alternate soundtrack, Type B, that featured remixes of classic King of Fighters tunes. The game would also feature redrawn versions of classic stages, such as Iori's King of Fighters 95 stage and the Pow Pow Cafe from Fatal Fury. A PC version would come to Steam in 2013 and GOG.com in 2018. The game is also coming to PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch in the near future in a port entitled Global Match, which features online play with rollback netcode. There's also a mobile version, but that had different gameplay and less content, so I won't discuss that version. King of Fighters 13 was made with longtime fans in mind, almost to a fault. If you love the tag team mechanic from the past two games, you're going to be disappointed, as the matches were back to classic 3-on-3 elimination. There are some substantial tweaks from King of Fighters 12. 13 introduced EX special moves, which are powered up versions of regular special moves that use one section of a super meter. This expanded to EX versions of the super attacks, which would use 2 stocks of a super meter. Another new tactic introduced in this game is the drive cancel feature, in which players can cancel one attack into another by entering the commands for the new attack while the first one was still active. This made use of the hyperdrive meter, as the cancels would slowly drain it. When the hyperdrive gauge was full, players could utilize what was called hyperdrive mode. This allowed players to pull off an unlimited amount of drive cancels for a short amount of time. The hyperdrive mode also allowed players to use the Neo Max Super Special move with only 2 power stock meters instead of 3 in normal mode. However, not every character had a Neo Max. This old school spirit also expanded to the roster. Again, if you like the zany lineups in King of Fighters 2003 and 11, prepare to be disappointed. On the other hand, if you are a fan of some of the game's classic lineups, prepare to be delighted. Let's start with Team Fatal Fury. After previous games seeing the likes of Duck King, Taizok, and Kim Cap-Wan join the team, along with Terry rocking his brown jacket, Team Fatal Fury was back to Terry, Andy, and Joe, with Terry back in his familiar red jacket and cap. Sadly, there's not a single Mark of the Wolves fighter to be found outside of story mode cutscenes, which I'll get to in a little bit. Takuma will return to the storyline for the first time since King of Fighters 2001, teaming up with his son Ryo Sakazaki and student Robert Garcia to reform the classic version of Team Art of Fighting, last seen in King of Fighters 95. Of course, this meant that Robert Garcia shaved his badass goatee that he had in King of Fighters 11. As for Yuri, she would rejoin King and Mai, reforming the classic version of the Women Fighters team, which hadn't been seen since King of Fighters 95. Shen would also rejoin the game's cast and make his very first appearance in the Tales of Ash story arc. He would, of course, reunite with Sai Kinsu and Anthena to reform the classic version of Team Psycho Soldier. Leona, having regained composure since 2003, would rejoin Clark and Ralph to reform the 95 Akari Warriors team. This wasn't that much surprising of a lineup, as the 3 had last appeared in King of Fighters 2003, so this lineup was still pretty recent. Also, Benimaru and Goro would rejoin Kyo to reform the classic Team Japan. Now, that's not to say there weren't any surprises though. Kim Cap-Wan would have his own team once again, but instead of joining with his longtime partners Chang and Choi, sometimes partner Jun, or even Mei Lee, he would team up with Raiden and Hwa Jai. Raiden, who had already debuted in King of Fighters 12, was a professional wrestler character who made his debut in the very first Fatal Fury game. Raiden was his heel persona. After being defeated, future games in the series would see him remove his mask and go under the name Big Bear, which was his face persona. By the way, if you're not into pro wrestling, face means good guy and heel means bad guy. Raiden's design was inspired by the late great Leon White, who wrestled under the name Big Van Vader. Hwa Jai, on the other hand, was another Fatal Fury alumni who made his debut in the original Fatal Fury also. King of Fighters 13 marked the very first time he would show up in the roster of a fighting game since then. Not only that, with the exception of the SNES port of the original Fatal Fury, this would be his first time as a playable character. Hwa Jai was a Muay Thai fighter who acted as Joe Higashi's rival and sought to dethrone him. In King of Fighters 13, the two would team up with Kim in order to boost their reputations as fighters, and to prove to Choi and Chang that they were better at pranking Kim. As for Kyo's rival, as this roster was focused on classic lineups, Mature and Vice will return from the dead as ghosts that can materialize as physical beings in the world of the living. Yeah, it was a cheesy excuse, but whatever worked, right? So Eerie, Vice, and Mature were a team in the storyline once again for the very first time since King of Fighters 96. Remember, every other time they appeared in King of Fighters was as part of a dream match. Surprisingly, K-Dash, Kula, and Maximum were the only team from King of Fighters 11 that didn't see any alteration. Of course, this meant that poor Whip had to sit this one out. When we last left off with Ash, Oswald, and Shen Wu, Ash had left his two former teammates to fight each other to the death. As Oswald is nowhere to be found, one has to assume the worst. Shen Wu, however, would leave Ash's side, replacing Benny Morrow on the rivals team, teaming up with Elizabeth and reuniting with Dio Lan. Speaking of Ash, he would be an edit-only character in the game. It's only natural, right? How else he's going to carry out his plan? This entry would introduce downloadable content to the series for the first time, at least in the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 version of the game. For a small fee, players can purchase EX Kyo, which is Kyo with his Nest Saga moveset, Iori with the Power of the Flames, which was basically Iori with his classic moveset, and Mr. Karate. Mr. Karate was an alter ego used by Takuma in the original Art of Fighting. This was basically a more powerful version of his regular moveset. You can also purchase an instant unlock for the game's mid-bosses, Psyche and classic Fatal Fury villain Billy Kane. Keep in mind, however, you can encounter and unlock these two normally by playing the game. By the way, who was Psyche? We'll get to him in a moment. In the Steam, GOG, and upcoming PlayStation 4 and Switch version of the game, all of the downloadable content will be included. Keep in mind, this game is the end part of a story arc that lasted nearly 8 years long and was left in the air for nearly half a decade. If you weren't already up to speed on the game's events, or you were new to the series, you definitely wanted to consult a wiki before jumping into this game. Otherwise, you might be lost when it comes to some of the story's concepts. Of course, you can also watch the last few episodes of my King of Fighters retrospective. Hint hint. But while the story may be too hard to just jump into, you won't have as much trouble picking up on the game's mechanics thanks to the comprehensive tutorial and mission modes. These two modes do a good job of letting new players pick up on the fundamentals on their own pace. The tutorial mode teaches you the basics of the system, while the mission mode drills you through character-specific tasks that help you master their movesets and combos. The mission mode also contains the survival and time trial modes. Along with the standard arcade mode, there's a story mode which fleshes out the game's plot. There are several dialogue-heavy scenes, and at certain points, you pick a team and have to battle, and at times you'll also have to pick from two choices. The choices you make along with winning or losing certain battles can affect the plot. In a way, you can see that SNK picked up some tricks from more modern games like BlazBlue, at least when it comes to single player content. The arcade mode is the same as it ever was. You pick your team, and you fight through several opponents, hoping to make it to the true final boss and see your team's true ending. Like in King of Fighters 2003, you need to score a certain amount of points if you want to have a chance to see the true ending. In this case, you need 2.5 million by the end of Battle 6. During single player matches, players are challenged to pull off random tasks. These tasks, called target actions, range from performing a move a certain amount of times to pulling off his combo with a certain amount of hits in a short period of time. Completing these actions can earn you bonus points. In addition, completing a certain amount of target actions per match in the arcade mode allows you to fight against either Billy Kane or Psyche as a mid-boss. Another cool thing in the game's arcade mode is that before each fight, there's dialogue between the two combatants. There's dialogue for every combination of characters. The game also features a customization mode where you can edit a character's color palette. What's cool about this mode is that some characters have a hidden alternate costume that you can discover in this mode, among them being Raiden's Big Bear mask and Elizabeth's King of Fighters 11 outfit. At long last, the man behind the group, those from the past, will be revealed finally. A mysterious man named Psyche. His plot was to travel to the future, which is the modern day, and steal the power of Orochi to replenish their army. This in turn would allow them to destroy their enemies before they become a threat. If you satisfied certain conditions during the arcade mode, you could face him in his human form as a mid-boss. Most likely when you battle against him, you'll fight him in his overpowered awakened form, which is a giant red demon. When you reach the end of stage 6, provided you fulfilled the 2.5 million points requirement, time stops, and you are once again confronted by those from the past, this time accompanied by their boss. You then get to witness Psyche heartlessly murder Mugaki for disobeying him. You remember Mugaki, right? You see, Psyche views his subordinates as indispensable pawns. After that demonstration, you then get transported to a hellish subspace to battle Psyche's awakened form. In true SNK boss fashion, it's frustratingly difficult. However, when you defeated this awakened Psyche, he had one more surprise. Ash Crimson would make a last-ditch effort to stop his plan, and that's when Psyche would take him over. You would then fight this evil possessed Ash in one final battle for the fate of all space and time. King of Fighters 13 was praised across the board by gaming media and fighting game fans alike. The major criticism was that the game was geared toward longtime fans and wasn't exactly accessible to newbies, but this is King of Fighters, so you'd expect that. It's highly regarded throughout the fan base as one of the best entries in the series, if not the best, and it's easy to see why. The graphics and animation are gorgeous, and the gameplay is on point. The music is a great throwback to earlier King of Fighters games. Again, if you like the crazy lineups from 2003 and 11, the rosters are a bit of a letdown. Then again, this is a package geared toward old school fans, and if that was you, you're going to enjoy this. And with the game headed to Switch and PlayStation 4, even more players will soon have the chance to experience this game. King of Fighters 13 would bring the tale of Ash to an end. It would turn out that Psyche was Ash's ancestor. Once you defeated the possessed Ash, he would use his free will to hold Psyche at bay. This prevented the two from entering the gate. Had they been able to do so, Psyche would have been able to return to the past and reset his plan once again. However, this time, with the gate closed, Psyche was prevented from returning to the past, meaning that he would soon be erased from existence. However, this also meant that Ash too would be gone. You see, since Psyche was his ancestor, if he doesn't exist, Ash wouldn't have been born. So it turns out Ash Crimson was a hero after all. He just had a different way of moving. One wonders what would have happened if he had been straight up with everyone. Maybe they could have all worked together to come up with a plan to stop those from the past without things reaching the 11th hour the way they did. Then again, that wouldn't be our Ash, would it? At the end, Ken Folk was willing to take himself out of existence to save the world, and possibly all of time and space. It doesn't get much more heroic than that. So that was it for those from the past. Though Xion from King of Fighters 11, along with Botan and some of the associates, were still out in the wild, the main figureheads were dead, and in Psyche's case, wiped out of existence completely. Even his memory began to disappear. Sadly, Ash too was gone. Or was he? See, there was something about Ash. You saw how he operated throughout the saga. He was out here playing Crusader Kings 3 while everyone else, from Hydern to even his affiliates and those from the past, were playing Hungry Hungry Hippos. He had plans on top of plans. Even if some of them involved doing people dirty, including his own friend Elizabeth, it was all for the greater good. Call me crazy, but I don't think something as small as being wiped from existence is going to be enough to stop him. I don't think we've seen the last of our man Mr. Crimson. I'm not into conspiracy theories, but if Ash pops up again, I wouldn't be surprised. But for now, that wraps it up for the Tales of Ash Saga. I know it's been a long time coming and I hope you enjoyed it. Out of all the games in the Retrospective series thus far, this single game has had the biggest script. Still, it was all worth it, and I hope you enjoy watching this video as much as I did making it. If you did, do me a solid and hit that thumbs up. Also, make sure you share this video and let your friends know about it. And don't forget to let me know what you think in the comments. If you're new to the channel, I like to cover retro games, indie titles, and gaming related tech. I do everything from reviews to previews to tech unboxings and even documentaries just like the one you just finished watching. If that sounds good to you, join the Mafia. All you gotta do is hit that subscribe button and I'll make you a made man. If you want to do one better, turn your notifications on. That way, you'll be the first to know whenever I drop a new video. But enough of that. In the next entry, we're heading straight into the modern saga with King of Fighters 14. This game introduced a number of changes for the series, and there are a bunch of new faces added to the cast too. It's gonna be a while before I drop it, because I got tons of other videos in the works. Also, there's the whole marriage thing. In the meantime, have a great day, thanks for watching, and I'm Audi 51000G, kinfolk.